Listen closely, because this isn't just another war story. It's the kind of tale that will grip your heart, twist your mind, and leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about courage, survival, and the human spirit. To my American and British brothers and sisters tuning in, if you believe in grit, in fire, in the kind of relentless determination that makes heroes rise from ashes, then this is for you. And before we dive headfirst into the chaos, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because stories like this, raw, unfiltered, and untold, don't just entertain, they inspire, and you won't want to miss the next one. Now let's step into the shadows of enemy territory, where one woman's nightmare became her battlefield, and her battlefield became her legend. The night was thick, the air heavy with smoke and the low growl of distant artillery, as Sergeant Alexandra Lexi Ward crept through the dense forest line, her uniform torn, her body bruised, and her hands bound behind her back with rough cord that cut into her skin every time she moved. She had been captured hours earlier when her reconnaissance team was ambushed by a swarm of enemy fighters, dragged through the mud, and thrown into a makeshift prison camp deep in hostile territory, where her captors sneered at her, mocking the idea that a lone woman soldier could ever pose a threat. But what they didn't know, and what they would soon discover in the most brutal way imaginable, was that Lexi wasn't just any soldier. She was trained for survival, bred for resilience, and pushed by a fire inside her chest that nothing and no one could extinguish, not even the iron bars and barbed wire surrounding her. As the guards grew careless, laughing and drinking by the dim firelight, she studied their every move, memorizing shifts, counting steps, noting who had the weakest grip on their weapon and who was most distracted when the bottle passed from hand to hand, her mind working like a machine under pressure, fueled not only by her will to survive, but by the memory of her fallen teammates who had been gunned down while she was dragged screaming into captivity, and she swore to herself with every ragged breath that she would make them pay, not in one sweeping blaze of vengeance, but one by one, methodically, silently, until the last man realized too late that the woman they had captured was not their prisoner but their executioner in waiting. And with that thought, her lips curled into a smile even as blood dripped down her wrists from the rope, because she knew the night would not end with her chained. It would end with them buried. The first kill came like a whisper in the dark, not with gunfire or explosions, but with patience and precision that only someone who had trained her body and mind to become a weapon could manage. Lexi waited until the guards were deep into their drunken haze, one of them staggering too close to her enclosure, fumbling with his rifle as he leaned against the wooden frame of the crude prison, and in that fleeting moment she twisted her body, forcing her bound wrists against the jagged edge of rusted metal nailed into the wall, ignoring the searing pain as skin split open and blood soaked her sleeves, until the rope frayed just enough for her to snap it apart. And before the guard realized he was leaning against a predator instead of a prisoner, she lunged, her hands shooting out with the speed of a striking cobra, wrapping around his throat, silencing his startled grunt with crushing force and twisting until his body went limp. She dragged him into the shadows, stripped him of his knife, and used his own belt to tie the shredded rope fragments around her wrists to disguise her escape. Her heart pounding but her breathing calm, her mind already calculating the next move, as if it were a game of chess where hesitation meant death. And as the night wore on, she used the darkness like a cloak, moving through the camp with the ghost-like silence of someone who knew the terrain of fear better than her enemies ever could, slipping into tents, dispatching men with ruthless efficiency, cutting throats, covering mouths, her eyes cold and merciless not because she lacked emotion, but because every memory of her fallen brothers and sisters in arms sharpened her resolve. And soon the drunken laughter turned into confusion as voices called out for missing comrades, the firelight flickering over worried faces that would never see dawn again. Because Lexi wasn't hunting for freedom anymore. She was dismantling them from the inside, turning their prison into her hunting ground. And though she had opportunities to escape into the forest, she stayed, because vengeance demanded patience. And as she hid in the rafters of the largest tent watching the enemy commander rant at his men about discipline, she clenched her stolen blade tighter and smiled, knowing this was only the beginning of the storm she was about to unleash. The enemy base had transformed from a rowdy, drunken outpost into a nest of paranoia and shadows, every soldier now gripping his weapon tightly, eyes darting into the darkness, whispering to each other about curses and ghosts, because men had vanished in the night without sound, their bodies discovered only at dawn with slit throats, broken necks, or lifeless eyes staring into nothing, and though their commander barked orders and promised brutal punishment for whoever dared infiltrate, none of them realized that the infiltrator was already inside, moving silently between them like smoke through cracks. Lexi had become more than a soldier. She was a specter, driven by fury but guided by discipline, and she used everything around her as tools. Broken bottles became shivs, loose nails became traps, even the corpses of her enemies became distractions. As she dragged one into a supply shed and rigged it so the next guard to enter would trigger a collapse, burying him beneath crates, his screams muffled as she slipped away. But her vengeance was not without cost, for she carried deep wounds from her capture. Her ribs bruised, her wrists raw, her stomach screaming with hunger, and the weight of exhaustion pressing down on her with every step. Yet it was the memory of her squad's laughter around campfires, the faces of friends who would never go home, that fueled her every strike. And so when the commander doubled patrols and ordered search parties into the surrounding forest, Lexi didn't flee as they expected. She followed them, one group at a time, eliminating them silently and returning before their absence was even noticed, until rumors spread among the enemy ranks that the forest itself had turned hostile, swallowing men whole. One night, when she overheard the commander promising reinforcements, and reinforcements meant armored vehicles and drones that could flush her out, she knew she had to escalate her war, so she targeted their communications hub, crawling through mud to bypass sentries, cutting the throats of 2 men guarding the radio tower, then planting makeshift explosives, crafted from stolen grenades and fuel cans, around the base of the structure. And when the tower collapsed in a fiery explosion, lighting up the night sky, panic spread like wildfire. And in that chaos, she struck harder, faster, slipping into tents where officers plotted strategy and leaving only blood-stained maps in her wake. But it wasn't easy. One night, she was spotted by a young guard who raised his weapon, and for a heartbeat their eyes locked, his filled with fear, hers with steel, and though he shouted, she lunged before the shot rang out, silencing him. But not before others came running, forcing her into a brutal firefight where she rolled, dove, and fired the stolen rifle until her shoulder ached, bullets slicing the air around her, and though she escaped into the woods with blood dripping from a graze across her thigh, the enemy now knew the ghost had teeth, and the legend of the captured woman who refused to die spread beyond the camp, into whispers carried on the radio, until even their reinforcements hesitated to enter the territory where one soldier had turned captivity into carnage. The final act of her vengeance came not in silence, but in fire and thunder, because by now Lexi knew that picking them off one by one would never erase the threat entirely. Too many reinforcements, too many supply lines, and so she planned something bolder, something that would either kill her or shatter the enemy's grip on the region forever. Over the weeks, she had mapped every inch of their camp, memorized guard rotations, identified the weapons depot, fuel stores, and command tent, and now, wounded but relentless, she dragged herself through rain and mud to set her trap, planting explosives made from scavenged munitions around the fuel dump, wiring together pieces of old radios as triggers, and leaving trails of evidence that lured the commander and his men into the heart of the camp, where he believed he could corner her. But what he didn't know was that Lexi wasn't hiding. She was waiting, perched high in the rafters of a storage shed like a hawk, her rifle steady despite the pain in her leg, her breathing controlled as she lined up the shot. and when she pulled the trigger, the bullet punched through the commander's chest and sent him sprawling into the mud. Chaos erupting as soldiers fired blindly into the shadows, shouting at each other in panic, and in that moment Lexi pressed the detonator, unleashing a chain of explosions that roared like thunder, fireballs tearing through fuel drums and ripping apart the depot, shockwaves knocking men off their feet, tents collapsing as flames devoured them, and amidst the inferno Lexi descended, moving like a phantom through smoke, firing, slashing, striking with the last reserves of her strength until the once proud base was nothing more than burning wreckage littered with broken bodies. But survival demanded sacrifice. And as she staggered away from the destruction, her vision blurred, her body trembling with blood loss. She collapsed by a stream miles from the flames, her consciousness fading. Yet before darkness claimed her, she heard the distant roar of helicopters, American insignia flashing in the night, and voices shouting her name, because her signal fire, the explosions, had drawn her own forces back to her. They carried her onto the chopper, faces wide-eyed with awe, because what they saw was not a prisoner rescued, but a warrior returned, a soldier who had turned enemy territory into a graveyard and carved her legend into the annals of war. And, though she closed her eyes as medics worked to stop the bleeding, a faint smile touched her lips because she knew her story was no longer just her own. It was a warning to every enemy who thought they could break her, a reminder that even when captured, even when surrounded, one woman with enough fire in her soul could rewrite the rules of survival and victory, one elimination at a time.